All right. So I think we're live now. And I hope we're live now. um, Hello, everybody. This is a little different from what we've done all this time. So Andy is very much here, but due to some tech issues, he's let us do this thing. So we're going to have a wild party in his kind of absence, but he's watching still. So it can't be that wild, I suppose. So let's behave, girls. uh, okay. So yes, I'm assuming that most of you who are joining us here, you're not new to this. You're quite familiar with what we're up to. We've been talking about the Bharcs way, and we've kind of done some case studies, and we've done some deep dives on specific topics that we thought may be of relevance. So today what we're going to be doing is we have Anushri leading this session. Say hi, Anushri.
Yeah.
uh, we are going to be looking at what is not the Bharcs way, because very frequently we have people who come in and say, oh yes, we understand this. This is exactly what we've been doing all along. Not that, not that you're not doing it all along, but quite often we see that we get misinterpreted, we get misunderstood, we get misquoted. And I think there is some kind of a communication gap there. There's something quite not going right. And I suppose it may be because this is quite complicated in a way, and then also quite simple in its own way, right? And so I think that's the reason why we kind of struggle with this. So we thought this would be relevant for us to kind of look at what is it not. So yeah, we're all here to support you, Anushri. Go for it. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sindhu, for setting that context. And hey, hi to everyone. Super excited to have you here. I think today is going to be quite interesting because even like for me, I had understood the concepts well enough, but it took time for me to see what that could look like and then how in how many varying degrees as well, right? So I think today is going to be interesting because there's I think a lot of us here who can speak to some of those examples. So I'm quite excited about that part specifically. Um, cool. So coming back to some of the key themes that we have covered over the last couple of episodes, right? And I think if we were to take some larger themes or inferences from there, just to call some of them out, it would be, hey, can we, look at it as dogs being experts at themselves, understanding themselves better than anyone else might? Can we also look at what does consent and choice look like? We kind of, talk through some of the case studies that answer to these things. We also did quite a bit of deep dive into the importance of canine communication, why it is so like almost the starting point, for anything else is if you don't know what communication looks like in their world, how do you know that it's being understood in the way that you're hoping it is, right? Like, so I think there's that misalignment. So we covered some of that. And we definitely touched upon some pieces of, what is what is allowing or making room for someone to show up as their true selves look like, right? I mean, where does authenticity play in the larger picture of each of these relationships and also in individuals, for each of us. Some of the other pieces we also covered were, how important it is to understand that, when we look at behaviors, and I think Surabhi put this really nicely in one of the episodes where she said, like, behavior is like the most direct indicator, if we allow for it, of what your dog is feeling, right? Or what they might be going through. And so the importance of sort of understanding that, hey, behaviors, they're so interconnected, and to not look at behaviors in isolation, understand or rather understanding the larger role of the environment that plays in a picture, the people in there, the other animals present. There's so much complexity there as well. And so also looking at it very holistically and looking at the larger pieces rather than, honing down on one thing and saying, and it's a very funny example. Okay, I'm going to digress, so I'm not going to do that. I'll come back to this because there's too many examples that I want to get into, but we'll come back to it. Some of the other things also that I think and I think this is more than a theme. I feel like it's a philosophy that we've sort of just grown into, which is you have to be willing to become a lifelong learner. You have to, you can't, even what we say today, tomorrow we may learn even more, right? There's we can come back and say, hey, this is what we thought it was, to make room for that to happen, because I think we're talking about another individual's life, right? There's a lot of complexity there. It's not black and white. And the biggest piece, of course, is the reflexivity aspect of it, which I know we've dedicated a whole day, a whole episode, which deservedly so. But so these were some of the key themes, and I thought what would be interesting is actually, I'm just going to pause, but before we get into each of these, how we wanted to structure today was to go into each of these themes and maybe talk about what actually it is when we talk about it from the Bharcs way versus what it is often perceived as and what those examples are, just so that I think hopefully we'll do a good job of drawing that comparison, right? So I'm going to pause here and see if, pass this around the room and see if anyone else wanted to add anything that I may have missed or just to add in general. Yeah.
So I think you really nicely introduced today's discussion, which will be like very different topics we are trying to cover here. So did you Anushi wanted to go into each specific topic now, or how?
Yeah, would that be okay? I thought we could pick up each of the key themes that we've covered and maybe do a deep dive into, hey, what is it when we talk about from the Bharcs way? What are we saying versus what it's commonly sort of perceived as, like Sindhu sort of alluded to earlier. And then maybe we can talk to some of these examples of how we've sort of, yeah, is that fair?
Yeah. So I think, I think this is an important one for us to discuss because, when the biggest problem that I have seen is there are components that people kind of completely misunderstand and do this very differently. And what happens then is the whole picture doesn't paint itself, right? Like it's like pieces of this are missing. And so it doesn't always work. So it may sound fabulous. Oh, the Bharcs way sounds fabulous. I want to do this, but then it's not working. It's just not working because there are these couple of pieces or one piece here, one critical piece there that is just being done so differently that it's not fitting in. And then you're wondering, is this broken? Is my dog broken? Am I broken? Like what really is going on? And so I think it's important for us to really, look at this aspect as well, to especially for those who are kind of serious about considering this way of dealing with, well, I shouldn't say dealing with dogs. I think it's dealing with life, right? Like this way of dealing with life and yourselves. Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So go for it.
Awesome. Cool. So the first thing I think maybe we can pick up is dogs as the experts. Yeah, because I think that's a nice one. Cool. So I think, and I'm just gonna maybe just put a one-liner out there to kind of summarize what it is from the Bharcs approach, and then I'll sort of move this around the room. But essentially, when we're looking at it as really understanding, acknowledging, and respecting the fact that, hey, okay, this is an adult of another species, right? They have inbuilt, I mean, they come with their own set of innate abilities that, I think that we can't overlook. And it is that interesting balance of saying, hey, I get that you are, another species, but you could still have a rich emotional experience, right? You can experience a range of emotions, very much like any other living being, very much like we do. And I think knowing that we are living some of these moments, to then assume that that won't be the same, I think that sort of assumption is a bit it can lead to a lot of downsides, right? So I think it's really about, okay, hey, so we understand that, you know, you have this set of innate abilities. What can I do, or how can I make room, you know, for you to guide those interactions that you have in your life, right? For you to tell me what it is that I can help you with, that I can support you with, that for you to come back and tell me that I'm ready for this, that, or whatever, right? But just to be able to say that, hey, I'm gonna be there as your partner in some way in this journey of life, right? Like, tell me what it is you need. I acknowledge that you're an adult and you have a complex decision-making process, so that there's a lot that goes into it. So, you know, I'm gonna help you sort of hone those decision-making skills, right? And what do you need to be able to do that? What do you need from me to be able to do that, right? But I think, and I'm just going to pause here because I think we can summarize this more succinctly within the group here. So I'm just going to pass this around if someone has another something to add to this piece here in terms of what it is when we talk about, hey, dogs are the experts.
I can go first. I like understood this like dogs as experts in theory, but I think before I joined Bharcs, I looked at dogs very one-dimensionally. And I always thought that, oh, I have to like figure this potentially tense situation out for my dog. I have to make a decision for him because he will not be able to figure it out. And then I remember, I know exact moment when this started to change for me, and it was the video Sindor of Chiru and Blackie when they were communicating. And when I saw like this rich communication, like how they figure stuff out, it like the cogs really started to shift and to move. And I know that it is not easy, especially if you have a dog who is struggling. It's hard to see them as an expert or as someone who can make good decisions. But I think in moments like this, that doesn't mean that we take like decisions away from them, but we tailor the situations in a way where they are able to start making the decisions, and then we like go from there. And it also like took like huge pressure off of my shoulders, because now I don't have to have everything figured out. I can look at my dog and like ask him, okay, what do we do now? And he guides me. So it became so much easier and so less pressure.
That's such a good point. Surbi, did you have something to add?
Sure, I can go and add. So I mean, I think I'm thinking about a couple of different premises, right? I think one is, you know, I think walking into any relationship, knowing that I know myself best, but the other person also has the capacity to know themselves best. And so how do we come together from those places of self-awareness, really? And I think that I think a lot of things come in the way of seeing dogs as experts as themselves, right? And again, you know, some of it has to do with some of it has to do with us not having the freedom and the opportunity to explore that for our own selves, or really trust our own information about ourselves. And so how do we do it for someone else? But also, how do we do it in a relationship where there seems to be some sort, like, at least in the beginning, there seems to be like some sort of internalized power dynamic where I am bigger than the dog. And so we see this even in, you know, parenting, where the parent is bigger than the child. And so that plays out as well. But I think if we if we walk in with the belief that each of us have the capacity to know ourselves really well and lead the way for what we want, then I think there's just so much more openness to figuring out, why is my dog not showing me what is working for them, or why am I struggling to believe that my dog is not an expert on their own selves. Because then we can talk, then the premise is that the core belief is they know it, but they're struggling to tap into that. And so how do I help them get to that point where that starts showing up in the relationship? So yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's beautiful. I think you like summed it up perfectly. Sindhu, Sauj, did you have anything to add at this point?
No, I mean, like, all of you have like rightly, I think all of you have put it in like really good terms of about dogs as the expert. I feel like I have more information about what it means, or why people find it difficult to, like, not see that. Would you want me to cover that in the non-application part of it, or you want me to like go now with it?
We could. Maybe I could just do a one-liner of what it isn't, and then we can move into the examples, and maybe that could fit right
Yeah,
in.
that's why
Yeah?
I was waiting.
Okay, cool. Okay, awesome. So I think we've hopefully covered and given you a good picture of what it is when we say, hey, dogs are the experts. And I think when we say what it isn't, I think if we start to talk about influencing behaviors, right? We because I think we start to look at behaviors not as a form of communication to us about what's happening inside, and more as something that needs to be adjusted because it's not fitting in our idea of what life with a dog should look like, right? Because you always have this thing, even in stories, right? Like you have this obedient dog, you have a good dog, and that's the definition of the dog. And even naughty is like clubbed in the bad. First of all, they have a clubbing, but then even to consider that being naughty, can even be considered in any other way apart from just being naughty. Right. So I think, so what it isn't, I think, is really going into this whole thing of, hey, I need to look at influencing the behaviors completely, sort of not acknowledging that, hey, they come with their natural set of abilities, their instincts, their preferences, their individuality, right? I think it'll be interesting now to see what that looks like with some of these examples, right? When we talk about maybe some of the behaviors that dogs naturally engage in, and maybe we can start with that example and maybe see what that can be perceived as sometimes. Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to pass it off. I know everyone's smiling, is excited to get going with this one, but Sauj, over to you.
Yeah, so I think I remember speaking about this about dogs as an expert, and I think what, like how Sindhu mentioned, that we take parts of the advice that we talk about and then try to apply, but it doesn't kind of fit into their picture, right? Because that's not the whole picture, right? Because we do so many other things. And so when I spoke about dogs as an expert, and when we talk about dogs as an expert, we also create room for the right kind of environment for the dogs, like read their communication. And I think one of the hardest thing that dog parents find it difficult, or like even my clients, is that they don't have their dogs kind of well regulated in a space of being rational enough to make those rational decisions. And then you have the entire like spiral, right? So then they put their dogs, these dysregulated dogs, in situations, and of course those dogs are unable to make those rational decisions because they are so wired up. And then they come back and say, oh, but my dog, I believed your advice, and that the dog is expert, but this is what my dog did, right? And I think that's one of the ways I feel like, when we take this advice of dogs as an expert, but then are not doing the rest of the things, the other pieces of the puzzle, it doesn't just land there. Which is why I think in one of our initial conversations we spoke about how to start doing this in smaller and safer ways, so that they can start seeing those small glimpses of, that the dogs are actually communicating constantly. But one of the recent times where, dogs as an expert, and then, I would not trust my dogs, right? Like, initially it was so hard to trust my dogs because I felt like they are constantly hungry, they're constantly wanting food, and they're constantly like, begging for food and things like that. And I was like, no, they don't know better, I know better about, what they want. And I think this I know better is probably what comes in our way of, allowing our dogs to be the expert. So for example, asking my dog to sit in a particular situation, which probably is not something good for my dog in that situation, that's not what my dog wants to do, uh, can be a way of me telling, this is what I know you need, I think this is what you need to do, and you need to do this. Of course, it may not be in this kind of tone. It might still be in a very loving, in a very, understanding way, but it still comes from a place of I know better than my dog does. And I think what is probably keeping the dog caregiver and from accepting a dog as expert is the other pieces of puzzle like we spoke about, where, the dog is so dysregulated, the environment is not the right environment to, to then test their dog, right? Test the dog for their expertise, right? And I think that's what I wanted to, like, that was what was coming to my mind when you talked about dogs as an expert, because I don't think it works in silos, right? Like all the themes that we're going to be talking about today, again, don't work in isolation. They all work together. So if I'm saying my dog is an expert, then I also am going to read their communication. I'm also going to give them choices, and then, they seek their consent. All of this works together again, right? It's not just one theme going for it, right? So I think that is what I wanted to bring up when you said dogs as an expert, because this was my experience with myself, but also like with the clients that I see. And I think it's very hard because when clients come through our doors, they're coming because their dogs are dysregulated, right? So they find it so hard to see, okay, my dog can actually think through, or my dog can actually be rational about this, or my dog can actually do this. I never knew my dog can do this. I don't think they have had that evidence because their dog has not been in those situations to get that, to be able to see that. And I think what Eva pointed out with Chiru and Blackie, like to be able to see something like that and to be able to see a dog do that and be like, okay, dogs can do this. I think that can be so magical in being able to see, okay, dogs are capable of so many things. So yeah, I think that is what I wanted to bring up.
So that's a great example. Thank you. I had an example, but I have just lots of stories. So I'm going to pass this around the room. If anyone else has an example of the non-application of this and what it looks like.
Can I just quickly add like a piece
course.
of the puzzle to what Saujanya said? Because I think she brought all of that together really well, like reinforcing that this is not in silos. And I also want to like add that you are I have found that I am also like I have also been more open to learning from my dogs about what works for them and not, when I am also not dysregulated. And I feel like that's such a big part of the puzzle as well, which again, I think is we've spoken about it, but that's also part of the Bharcs way, right? Which is help your dog emotionally regulate, but also like emotionally regulate your own self, right? And I think for me, like a really simple example is, if I'm trying to get my dog into the car and my dog is resisting to get into the car, if I am in a dysregulated state, I am not going to read what that behavior could potentially mean, right? In that moment, I'm just going to be like, oh my God, you're being so stubborn and you're being so difficult in this moment. Why can't you just get into the car, right? And then it's the whole, you lift the dog up without consent, all of those different things, right? But I think that I just wanted to also like share when Sauj was talking about that I think that dysregulation piece is a big one, because again, I think that for some reason, it so happens that when we think about our relationships with our dogs, a lot of us don't necessarily think of how we are showing up in that space, and how parts of us are also influencing the relationship and coloring the lens in which we're seeing our dog's behaviors, right? So it's often just the dog, here's what you can do to fix the dog, but there is actually nothing around, hey, can we take a step back and figure out like what's going on with you, and how is that influencing the context in which you collectively are as well. So I just wanted to add that last one.
Awesome, thank you. Did anyone have an example? I think there was, Eva, did you have one that you wanted to talk about, or we can move to the next?
We can move to the next, yeah, if you have.
So I do want to add something, and a quick time check. So we have a lot of points to cover, and we're almost kind of at half an hour, so halfway in, and we're on the first point. So clearly we need like more than a few months to do this thing. I think one thing that I did want to point out is, what is this not? It is definitely not, oh, let them fight it out. Right? Because that is something that I know that a lot of people feel very strongly about, but that's definitely not the case. We are talking about doing this in safe ways. We're not allowing them to fight it out. There's a lot of conversation around emotional regulation, and I think these kind of really touch upon nicely upon the concept of reflexivity that we're going to talk about tomorrow as well, that, you know, you really we can't be going down this path if you do not include your own journey as part of it. So yeah, I wanted to add that in.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think on the topic of can't fight it out, also this the adrenalizing games, you know, and this constant obsession that our dogs seem to have with these kind of games, and then be like, oh, my dog loves it, again comes from the point of, can we take a step back and see if this is even natural for our dogs? What do free living dogs show us, and then what is their environment like? So I think, again, dogs as an expert, it is not about never intervening and never, you know, supporting them. It's not about let them figure it out, and, you know, it's not about that. It's obviously in safe ways, whatever, you know, they're whatever spaces they're in, but also showing up where they need our support, and also figuring out whether they're even in a space to be able to actually rationally think through and like slow down and then actually think through what their next, you know, response to a particular, you know, change in the environment or what's happening in their environment. Are they actually able to stop and then think through? And if they're not, then that tells you that they're probably dysregulated. I think that is another bit, because I think adrenalizing games is something that's so,
Yeah.
you know, we all obsess over it because dogs means, you know, you go and play these kind of games with them. But is that what the dogs are trying to achieve? What is their state of mind, their mental state telling us? And I think non-application, I think that is what I would assume, you know, is non-application of the Bharcs way, which is, we're not talking about letting your dog loose. And it's not even like permissive parenting, like how we talk about in parenting terms. It's not even permissive parenting, like do everything, you know, with no boundaries. That is also not what we're talking about.
Yeah, we recently had this conversation around addiction, right? Animal addictions in animal worlds and stuff like that. So there are kind of behaviors, I mean, behavior patterns there that we have to be sensitive to. But so it's not overlooking all of that and just saying, oh, let them do whatever they want to, and we're just going to be completely hands-off. That's not it. It's more nuanced than that. Yeah.
It's actually a combination of knowing like who dogs are as a species and then looking at the individual dog. For example, like, so we know that sniffing is a very natural behavior for dogs. And if your dog is not sniffing, the solution is not making your dog sniff and saying, oh yes, problem solved, but asking yourself, okay, like sniffing is so natural for dogs. Why my dog is not sniffing? Like why the dog is not sniffing? So I think, yeah, it's so like multidimensional. And at first I think it sounds very complicated, but then you start putting the pieces together and you're like, okay, this makes so much sense now.
Yeah, that was a good example. I think that really gave you like a real life example of what that looks like, right? And I think I also recently saw some conversations around like training a dog to sniff, and I was like very confused about you're right, what that even means. And rightly, instead of asking the question of, hey, if this is something that dogs do naturally, why isn't this something my dog's engaging in, right? Like, what am I not providing for my dog? What is missing? I think that's the interesting lens to look at it from. Cool. I'm going to quickly move on to the next one, which is, I think one of the other big things that we've talked about, and that's really just throughout all of the pieces, is choice and consent. I think really just giving room, like Eva rightly pointed out, right, and that sweet spot between, hey, understanding the species and the individual, right, and then giving room for your dog to sort of decide when and how they want to engage, interact, how they want to live, what are the routines, what's the lifestyle, and the way that this became hard for me. I mean, when we were initially talking, I remember in Canine Essentials 101, Sindhu talks about, you don't realize, but when you bring home a dog, you make all decisions for them, right? From what they eat, when they eat, how much, where, what time, where they poop. I mean, some dogs can only apparently poop morning and evening. They're not, that's just like the whole life is just like a fixed timetable, right? And then, and you don't, and if you had to draw a parallel like to a human who had to live in those conditions, I feel like, I think there's a lot of question marks that come up there. So does it mean that, hey, okay, fine, sort of relinquish all control to your dog, right? And so we will come to what it is not, but it is definitely not relinquishing all control, right? It's giving back a sense of control to your dog over their own lives, which they rightfully have. It's understanding that, hey, we live as adults together. I have choice. I mean, I would hate. Okay, personally, I don't like people like touching me, like, I don't like it. And unless it's something that I'm consenting to or I've asked for. And so for me, this is one of those areas where it felt easier for me to extend it as I was learning, extend this to dogs, because it was extremely relatable to me, right? Just having a choice over whether you want to interact with someone or not, right? Just that's so important. And I think we don't realize that impact on an individual sense of safety, right? Just that is literally the most foundational aspect of a living being feeling safe, is to have some sense of control over their own lives. So I think that's what I like, how I've sort of perceived what the Bharcs way is, and what the application of, when we talk about choice and consent, what does it mean? And I know we have like a lot of examples that can help here, but I'm just going to pass this around the room and see if anyone wants to talk to what it is, or if anyone wants to pick up the piece of, hey, okay, what it isn't.
Can I go with what it is, but also what it isn't?
Yes.
So, like you gave a great example of how we make all the decisions for our dogs, right? And I think this is an example that I've started loving recently, because we do a Zoe led feeding routine, right? So she decides, when she gets food, because I mean, she's hungry, she's asking for food, she gets food. Like, I now see how that kind of makes sense. Does that mean that she gets more quantity, more than, what's, healthy for her? No, it doesn't. Does that mean that she gets to eat anything and everything? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that if she is asking for food, she clearly is listening to her body. Dog is an expert. She's communicating to us, and she deserves to get that food, because, as you rightly said, if I were to be denied food when I'm hungry, and many of people who are watching this as well will agree that it is a very irritable, frustrating, and a very stressful experience to have, right? And I think we started doing this very recently with her, where she feels hungry, she gets food. That's the rule of the house, right? So whenever people have come over and then they had to take care of her, they'd be like, what's her feeding timing? And we always have told, when she's hungry, she gets food. That's the feeding time. That's the routine, right? So that is what it looks like in terms of what it is to me. What it isn't, and I've been like very passionately been talking about this, is when you try and then use an incentive to drive the meaning of choice, right? For example, and I'm going to make a controversial statement, so I don't know what is going to come after this, which is like crate training, right? I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, my dog loves crate," and that's where my dog sleeps now. But then I come back and ask, "Was your dog trained with food or anything, in the crate?" And then there's always that, yeah, my dog was trained to be there. And where is the aspect of choice when you use something that is such an innate survival need, like food, or sometimes even connection, right? For example, there are people who the dog is in the crate and then you pet the dog to make the dog feel like nice, and inside the crates there's connection there. When there are such innate needs being driving that so-called choice, is there true choice there? So I think we need to start looking at, if I were to remove these incentives to my dog, offer these incentives regardless, offer these needs regardless, because these are like basic needs, would my dog still choose to do this? And that's the important question when you are talking about choice. And I'm now bracing myself for all the backlash with this statement.
No, don't worry. Don't. We'll just disappear for like 3 months. I'm kidding. No. So I actually I love that. I did want to talk about the crate thing. I mean, I know I shared this some time ago, but this thing of it's painful actually to think that an animal has to spend any amount of time in a cage. Doesn't matter for what, right? And I'm not talking about situations where an animal is injured and they're asked to rest, or I'm not talking about those situations. I'm talking about just general in life, right? We make a big hue and cry about other animals in captivity, but I don't know, sometimes I know, again, I'm digging another, like a bigger hole for myself, but it does make me question some of these things and the way that we change the meaning to sort of suit the convenience of this, right? So I think that's but on a lighter note, right? Let's just make this a little bit like move this a little like a different example I wanted to share on the choice piece of it. And this again like throughout all of these themes, you'll see that they're all interconnected, right? We touch upon each of everything is interconnected. So one of the things that I want to talk about was, so we have a now 10-year-old pug. Her name is Bella. And long story short, hated walks. I had to consult with Sindhu, so changed all of those things. And then interestingly, so got my partner as well, start doing, loose leash walks, this, that. And then one of the things that we also do is, hey, there's a huge difference between asking your dog if they want to go for a walk and saying, let's go for a walk, right? Like if I'm asking you, I'm going to say, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Like where you feel like you can say, yeah, actually, no, right? Versus saying, let's go for a walk, right? You're like, okay, but I don't want to. But you're not leaving room for someone to have that choice or feel like they have that choice, right? As I was trying to explain this to my partner, and he said I was overthinking this, right? So he said, I'm doing a loose leash walk, and it's going great. She loves her walks and stuff. Maybe 2 weeks into this, so it's not even a long timeline, right? 2 weeks into this, the minute he says, takes the leash, he doesn't say anything, let's go for a walk. She wants to, but she turns around and comes running towards me to say, I want to, but I want to go with you, right? And my partner couldn't believe this. He was like he took it very personally, right? But it's as simple as that. And the relationship has changed so much, because I think when we were saying, hey, let's go for a walk, we didn't take into account that, hey, man, she could just not feel like she's not, she's in pain. Her tummy is hurting. She's got a headache. Her ears bothering her. Her skin's itchy. She hates she's very sensitive. Many dogs are with texture. So if it's wet, she doesn't want to do it. So I think we just deny like we don't even acknowledge that these things can exist for a dog. We're just assuming that every day they wake up at 100% and they're functioning at like 100%, and then you recharge their battery and they're up again and having the same life every day, going through the same emotions and experiences. But like it doesn't work like that, right? You gotta, and I think the more choice you give, the safe choices. And again, when we say choice, it's not about, hey, in a medical situation, okay, what tablet do you want to take? Or you don't want to take? Okay, cool. It's not that. It's, hey, today I got like for their food, instead of like mixing everything together or like masking food and this and that, I've started doing, and I had to learn it a very hard way, which is place the food and say, hey. And it's as simple as, because like Sindhu said, it's not about the larger thing. It's about getting your dog into the habit of pausing for a minute and making a decision, thinking about, hey, what is it that I need in the moment? What is it that is going to be work for me? So yeah, so that's the example that I want to share on choice. Just gonna Eva, Sindur, Survi, anything you guys wanted to add here on the consent and choice piece?
Yeah, I think like COVID really put it in perspective. Is that the word? Yeah, okay. How frustrating it is if choices, like the possibility of making choices, is taken away from you. And I think like different countries had different restrictions, but I think like none of them were as hard or as strict as restrictions we put on our dogs. And I was also one of this like people thinking that if I don't make like my dog do something, we will not move forward, right? He himself will not decide to react to dogs differently, do stuff differently. Like I have to be the one who's driving the change. And I think this is very interconnected to the previous theme. And one thing that, like one of many things that changed without me driving the change, but letting Balt choose, was walking in the rain. So when he came to me, like he refused it, like I'm not stepping out. And I was like, because I already started Bharcs, I was like, okay, so this is your decision. But because he had to go like to the toilet, so I got him into the car and we drive to this like underpass. So it was dry, no rain. So he could do his thing, and we were doing that. Like I didn't even have it in my mind, okay, we have to change, like you have to walk in the rain. But then one day there was rain and he decided, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go, like it's not a big deal. So yeah, it's like I think like we don't put enough faith in our dogs, that they are able to like to evolve and to grow. And I was just talking with we were just talking yesterday. I said like 4 years in, and Balt like still surprises me. He's still growing, he's still changing. So yeah.
Every time you tell his stories, I think it's just like, it's crazy, like how much change happens. And it's not even like it's not like you're going after a checklist. And I think that's a beautiful piece of this. You're just like, hey man, what makes you happy? Like, how do you want to enjoy and live life, right? Like it's almost just figuring that piece. Sindhu, Sauj, anyone else wanted to add anything to this?
Surbi, you want to go first and then I'll go next.
Very quickly. I think one part of it is like restricting freedom, restricting choices, but I also see the other extreme of it, which is when sometimes we become really fixated about our dog's preferences also, right? To saying that, for example, my dog only likes this, or my dog only prefers this. And I think even that can have that kind of effect, right? To say it's great to be aware of those preferences, but are you still giving options? Are you still letting your dog figure out what works for them at what point of the day, in what state of mind? And I think I love what Eva said in terms of our dogs are constantly like growing and evolving and figuring things out, right? Like we don't have fixed preferences, all the time, and neither do our dogs. So I think even keeping that flexibility in our own minds to say having choices or having preferences does not necessarily mean all the time that it's just like a small bunch of things that we will consistently want to do again and again. But it is to say that there could be something that's grounding, but we still want to explore, right? And I think how do we discover that exploration if that's not necessarily offered to us? So I just want to share that as well.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting one and an important one, which is that when we give dogs choices and we want to give them choices, we also exercising choice and exercising good judgment is a practiced thing, right? And if you've never given them choices, I've seen that dogs don't know what to do with the choices. They don't really know how to operate that. And so I think there is a certain amount of practicing this and kind of, again, in safe spaces, giving them, and they can get, sometimes they can get overwhelmed and stressed as well, saying, you decide for me, why are you putting me in this? I remember walking my sister's dog, and in the beginning I would say, allow your dog to choose, so let your dog lead, and the dog would just turn around and say, why are you not telling me what to do? And so a lot of dogs that have been kind of really trained to live life a certain way can get overwhelmed, and it's going to be a transition. That's one. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is, if we influence their choices heavily, either with massive rewards or with kind of consequences, not necessarily punishment, but dogs are so in tune with our emotion. I'm just writing my dissertation paper, I'm finishing up, and we were going through the papers where how sensitive they are to our own emotions, right? And now Chiru, if she would go do something that I didn't like, and I showed it to her on my face that I didn't like, that was enough for her to say, oh, okay. Now, if she's having a disagreement, not a violent one, not a hurtful one, but hey, I don't like you, kind of a disagreement with another dog, and then I show that I don't like this because I like that other dog. Now I'm not really giving her too much room for choices, because I'm telling her that I'm disappointed in your actions. And she is going to, the wonderful connection that we had, the consequence, the result of that was that she would feel terrible about what she had done. And just simply living her social life and feeling terrible about it. So, and that's just my disappointment. My excitement has a whole other thing, a whole other way of influencing her as well. So just through our excitement and disappointment, we're shaping them. We're kind of trimming off those choices, not necessarily, like hacking it, but trimming off the choices. And then you add, solid rewards and punishments. And these rewards are not just rewards, they're high value rewards. And, how do you increase it? How do you make it effective? Then, it's not really a choice if I'm going to tell you, well, it is your choice whether you want to come into work or not. But if you don't come in, your career prospects are going to be impacted. And if you do come in, I'm going to give you a bonus. How is that a choice then, right? That's not really a choice. I mean, I had a little bit more crass examples that I would give out earlier, but I'm not going to do that. Then Andy's going to be like, I should never have put you in control of this. So let's stick to cleaner examples. So I think that was the other aspect. And then the third aspect that I wanted to bring up is giving choices to dogs does not mean there are no boundaries. And it also does not mean sacrificing ourselves completely, in order to enable choices for the dogs. There is a certain concept of negotiation there. And that, I think, leads to the next aspect quite nicely, which is utilize that communication to negotiate. Somebody asked me recently, oh, you are going and petting a dog that Chiru doesn't like. How is that right? Well, I'm not bringing the dog into our house. I am not asking Chiru to get along with that dog. I'm not even petting the dog in front of Chiru. But that does not mean I don't get to have a relationship with the other dog, right? Giving choice to my dog does not necessarily mean that I am completely sacrificing myself. We're negotiating what works for both of us. So I think that, again, that nuance needs to be kind of brought into the discussion.
Yeah, I think you're right. It perfectly does sort of lead into the next piece of why it's so important to sort of understand canine communication, right? Like what are these behaviors telling us? What is it that we should be paying attention to? And I think when we look at that from a Bach's perspective, for us, it's literally our our guidebook, right? Like it's telling us how to what needs to be done in that moment. It's literally just and there was a very interesting, it just happened now, and I was talking to my partner about the difference between. So there was someone knocked at the door. My dog barked. I immediately reassured, "Hey, it's okay. Address this thing." And simultaneously, when I said it's okay, my house help said, good girl," when she stopped barking. Okay, so I was just talking to my partner about this, and I explained the difference between the two, right? And I said it is similar to, and I hope this makes sense, but it's how it made sense, even more sense to me. I was like, imagine if you were in danger, or you not you were in danger, but you perceived a threat, right? And you shout out, you say, hey, something's off. So there's someone here, something, right? I'm unsure of something, and I come in there and say, okay, hey, good girl, good boy, you stopped. It's okay, right? Rather than saying, hey, okay, are you okay? It's okay, I'll handle it, right? So it's like it's rewarding someone for stopping their expression, which is strange to me, because in that moment it's not about, I don't want her to stop barking. I don't want her to think that when she stops barking, that that's a good thing, then that's what we want. And there's a difference between saying, hey, it's okay, are you feeling okay now, is there something you need, versus saying, yay, good job, good job. Like there's a significant difference between the two things. One is you're genuinely saying, hey, I acknowledge your fear. I'm going to reassure you. What do you need from me? Versus the other saying, hey, good, you stopped barking, because that was a bit inconvenient because we live in an apartment and we have whatever, we can come up with a million excuses why a behavior of a dog can be, like a natural behavior of a dog can be inconvenient, right? But to then take that, and then I actually don't want my dog to stop barking ever. I want her to communicate to me, tell me what it is that she needs, right? And so I think when we talk about communication and understanding that, being open to it, I think there's also the aspect of, yeah, definitely knowing what that looks like, but also coming back to the aspect of choice and consent, which is, are you choosing to pay attention to the signals that you're getting or the communication you're getting from them as well, right? Like I've seen videos where they actively talk about and call out calming signals, but then continue to escalate their behavior towards that, right? And then they're surprised that the dog is like, oh, I didn't see it coming. Well, Sindhu says this a lot. She's like, well, yeah, you didn't see it coming, but the dog tried to communicate to you in multiple different ways, right? So then it's also, so there's a lot of nuance there, but I'm going to like move this around, just in terms of, if you guys want to, talk to what it is, or even what it isn't, which is some of the pieces that I already sort of covered, but I'm sure you guys have really nice thoughts and examples there.
Can I go?
Yeah,
I have
please.
like what it is, what it isn't again, right? Like,
Lovely.
and that I like because when I was doing my back bed, communication and reassurance, that was like kind of what cemented the entire thing. And this is now something that I keep telling my clients is, if you start looking at behaviors again as something that you need to change, good or bad, then you're constantly trying to get a certain behavior from your dog and see certain behaviors as bad. You pointed, Anushri, that you don't want your dog to stop barking because that barking is communication to you, but you still did reassure. And that reassurance again is not as a, you are expecting a response of a behavior from your dog. And I think again, reassurance, the concept of reassurance again gets taken in out of context. And then Surbi has a great video of doing this with mutton as well, in on her Instagram, of like hand signal, and people can go and then do a hand signal and be like, oh, but my dog did not stop barking. Or even our videos of when we show this, if the dog continues to bark or continues to behave in a certain way, oh, your methods don't work, right? And I think the biggest non-application is to look at what methods work mean, because for us in Bharcs, I think when we talk about our methods working, it's about, are we able to build trust with our dogs? Are they able to trust us? Are we able to trust our dogs? Are we able to give them safe environment? But when you talk about behavior modification entirely, I think working means to stop certain behaviors and actually replace them with better behaviors or desirable behaviors. And so, of course, a dog barking then looks like your methods are not working. But I think that two-way communication of, and I keep telling this to my clients nowadays, that, do the hand signal, don't fixate on what your dog's behavior is after this. Your dog probably may not stop barking, but that is not what we're trying to build here. We're trying to build the idea that you are going to show up for your dog, because oftentimes our dogs go barking and we don't even probably acknowledge that something has been bothering them, right? Your hand signal, your reassurance is good enough to show them that you will show up for them, and that is building the relationship. So I think this communication, this idea of, I am saying something to you, did you catch that? Okay, you didn't catch that, that didn't work for you. Like, what happened? What do you need from me at this point? Okay, reassurance is not working for you, but you just want me to be here. That two-way communication, if we're not having that and we're fixating on that behavior alone, or even to modify the behavior or modify the emotion itself, even that, and I think that will come into the authenticity part of it, modifying behavior, modifying emotion, then takes away the essence of what Bharcs Way is then. So I feel like, communication as a two-way street, and not like looking at, okay, I am communicating to influence your behavior, and that is my goal. I don't think that when we are doing Bharcs Way, we are not communicating to influence behavior, but to be able to have that, like Sindhu mentioned, negotiation, or like reassure, to build trust, to build that safe relationship with our dogs. And I think that would be authentic. But if you're like, you're not, that is not the goal, and just the behavior or the emotion modification is the goal, then it becomes like non-application of Bharcs Way, in my opinion.
It's communication, right? So we might not like what the other individual communicates to us, right? But yeah, I think, and then it's on us if we want to listen to that individual, or we want to like walk away, not listen to them. But I think if we want to like work on a relationship with anybody, we do have to listen to what they are saying to us, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, imagine if you were in a relationship where you could never say no. Like, I'm feeling like a bit nervous thinking about a situation like that. Like, we could just never say no in any form. I don't mean just verbally saying no. I mean, even in your behavior or in your expressions, right? That's a scary notion. Okay, cool. Did anyone else want to add something here? Because I feel like the next two pieces are on authenticity and reflexivity, which maybe Sindhu, you want to maybe pick that piece and maybe use it as an intro for tomorrow, set the context there as well, or would you like me to cover this piece and then we can do that separately? You're on mute though.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We'll get to that. Surabhi, did you want to add something for this? Okay, so I did want to add a few things in terms of how people misunderstand communication, right? And I think the point that all of you have been bringing up is communication is not simply about instruction, right? Communicate, it's like saying, hey, I would like to have a conversation with you, and then have like the single-sided barrage and not allow the other person to actually come back. That's not really communication. And I've seen people misuse the word communication and use it in two ways. One is when it comes to calming signals that we talk about, or dog signals, or whatever dog language. One is trying to say, okay, I'm going to teach my dog how to communicate better. How do I teach my dog how to give signals, right? So that's really not what we're talking about. And I think we can do a whole other session on, why that's not it, and how do we go about it instead. But I think a better way to do it is to come into our classes and have this discussion. And then the other way I also see people go wrong with communication is teaching dogs our words. and think that that's the beginning and the end of communication, right? I teach you the meaning of my words and you will do what I want to do. And now we're communicating. I'm sorry, but no, that's not communication at all, right? That's just instruction. And I've seen people say, okay, let's not call it cues, let's not call it commands, but really that's what they all are. At the end of the day, they're a one-way instruction, and there isn't, communication. It's really communication if it goes both ways. And so I think that's a very critical key component in a differentiation, and multiple of you brought up the ability for them to actually come back and say no. And then the other aspect of it is the nuance of communication, right? It's not functional. It's not just about, hey, this is window, door, food, bowl, sit, walk, run, but there is nuance in it, which is this kind of the feeling in there, which is, okay, I'm reassuring, but it doesn't seem to be reassuring. Maybe you don't want reassurance at this point. Maybe the way I'm trying to reassure you is not really working as reassurance for you at this point. So there is so much of this back and forth. And there's a philosopher, Wittgenstein, who talks about this idea of language is not simply about words. We play language games, which means that words mean something in the context, right? It's the context that matters. It's the shared context, and the same thing can mean different things. And that's the fluidity. There's a dynamic nature to communication, and that needs to be factored in. And of course, the last part of it is also that behavior in itself is also communication, right? And our behavior and their behavior is also communication. So there's communication happening at that level as well. So I think there are all these aspects to add to the conversation around communication. And that's the bit I wanted to add. And so, Anushri, you can kind of take over and do the last part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And let's take a little bit of extra time and do it anyways.
Cool. The party. Okay, just kidding. Yeah. So I think that's a good segue to some of the other things. Right? We've been talking about why, like how we sort of misinterpret and then end up influencing behavior. Right. And therefore, I think the piece of then are we truly allowing ourselves the opportunity to see this dog in front of us for who they are. Right? Are we giving room for that? And I think the struggle for me was hardest in this aspect because I didn't realize that you could do that. I suppose I didn't realize that you can have a relationship where you just can be yourself and there's no judgment, right? Like I've never experienced that until a lot of these things. And even now, when I think about where it comes most naturally from is from my dogs. They are completely non-judgmental about the way that I behave. I can act up so many times, and I have done terribly, and they will be like, cool, that doesn't define who you are. That's just okay, we'll move on, right? And of course, you have to do the work to repair that relationship again and say, okay, I made a mistake. I got to take a couple of steps back. It's my fault. Reassess. All of those things have to be done. But I think just really allowing, making room for that expression of feelings and emotions, and in ways that come naturally to them, that can be inconvenient to us, that can be uncomfortable for us. I saw a video today, someone sent me extremely cute video of a pug who picked up at home. I think there was some delivery, there was a brown paper bag. He picked it up and he was ripping it. And the entire line of dialogue, and this can be triggering because it was triggering for me. It's not harsh, but you'll see why it can be so rude. The parent just went on this entire thing, like Sindhu was saying, right? Just this barrage of, you've taken that, don't you know that you can't eat it? You've already had your dinner. And the dog is frozen. Like this pug is frozen with the poor thing. Like I'm feeling somewhat just saying it, but he had like one piece of the paper in his mouth. And he's just frozen there, standing there like that. And the comments are like, and he's saying that, and you still have the audacity to keep that in your mouth, drop it right now. And I'm just like, what are you saying? Like, if I had to take it in a separate context and you consider that, hey, okay, ripping, shredding, chewing are behaviors that are part of a dog's ethogram. Like, how can you fault a dog for doing that? They don't know that, hey, this paper bag is from Chipotle and that you value it so much more than how you're treating your dog. That becomes important to you. I mean, so for me, I think that was really, and I think worse than that video is the comments. Oh, so cute, he really like, and I'm just like, and he actually ends up picking up the dog and pulling that out of his mouth, right? But it also comes to the other aspect of he's a pug, sure, but he's still a dog, and that's not okay to do. Like, I would not pick up an adult of another species and take out what's in their mouth unless, I mean, it's like savage, right? If I did it to someone else, they'd really lock me up. So, right, when I was looking at this, so it's also that, hey, okay, I understand that we live in a house and I don't want this, like, to just, okay, so then rip up my entire house and take the sofa with you. It's not that. It's, hey, can I provide you the opportunities, the safe opportunities for you to engage in behaviors that come naturally for you, to engage in behaviors that are in many ways used as coping mechanisms for you, right? You engage in that because you're figuring out a way to regulate. And I remember a video very nicely of our dogs, Jojo, and since then we've kept like a stack of paper bags. But every time he was triggered, I think at this point he was just like, okay, I know what I need, and now they've given me the opportunity to do that. He just picked up the paper bag, and there's a video of that on my Instagram, and he comes back and he sits and he's chewing it, and he's done with it, right? So the argument of, okay, so then I can't leave a document lying around is like, what? Give the dog something appropriate and meet the need that the dog is trying to, that's driving that behavior, right? And then you're done. Okay, I'm calm now. Thanks, I got the opportunity. I'm gonna chill now, right? So I think there's a lot of I think we can go on and on. So I'm just gonna move this around. If anyone wanted to add specifically maybe touch upon what it isn't, or go into some examples, that would be great as well.
So first, I'm super amused by how, like, I think how you are so amused by some of these ideas just really comes through how you talk about it. But I was also thinking about, like, I think when we talk about authenticity, I think like not like really accepting your dog for who they are and not creating an authentic version that you think of them, and I'll tell you, like, I see this and it makes sense, but it's also just so surprising all the time. I see this most with Labradors and Golden Retrievers who have biting behaviors, where the hardest thing clients experience is, but this is not how the dog is supposed to be. Like, this is not how the breed is supposed to be, right? Like, there's some sense of this is what a true version of this dog looks like, and their dog is not that version. And so I think bridging that gap then becomes so difficult. But that is the true conversation around authenticity, right? It is about, can I be who I am? And again, at this point in time, I don't even think we need to give caveats in terms of safety, in terms of boundaries, choices, all of those things put together, right? But authenticity is being able to have also psychological, physical, emotional safety to just act the way that I want to act, right? And respond to the environment the way that I want to respond, make sense of the world the way that I'm making sense of, as opposed to fit into, again, a frame of what you think my authentic version needs to look like so that it fits, your lifestyle, your expectations, your own sense of authenticity for your own self, right? Like, I think that's just something that I was thinking about as well.
Yeah, so I was having this conversation recently, right? This breed-based definition of authenticity. And to me, and we spoke about intersectionality recently as well, to me, this is not very different from, for instance, saying, oh yeah, an authentic woman has to be like this. So, authenticity when seen in women is supposed to look like this. Authenticity really boils down to that individual. And and us draw, and we're spending a lot of time understanding the needs of a dog, understanding ethograms, understanding breed-related behaviors, but using all of that information to then paint a picture of this is what the authentic version of you is supposed to look like. And I think there again, and we're meeting the breed needs, right? And there again, what we're doing is we are kind of, this is not what the Bharcs way is about, right? This is not, I'm meeting the needs and you have defined what the needs are. Rather than looking at the individual, you have defined what the needs are based on the textbook knowledge. You're putting yourself front, right, and center. And I think that kind of, nicely segues into reflexivity, which we will talk about tomorrow. But I think that is, that is a pet peeve of mine, really, and that's why I kind of jumped in, because it's on my mind, and I get kind of quite annoyed with when I get pushed back on this. And I suppose that annoyance comes from the fact that I have been subject to that. Oh, you are this person, your authentic version is supposed to look like that, and I've never ever fit any definition that has been drawn anywhere for me. And I felt so much like a misfit. And I think it really resonates with me. And that kind of brings up this question for me, which is, why are we so terrified of real authenticity? Whether it's, from human beings or dogs, like, why do we have this extraordinary fear of actual authenticity that we want to script this at the end of the day? We want to orchestrate it and then, give ourselves a pat on the back that, yeah, we did this, right? We've given room for authenticity, but my version of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we like as a society,
idea
we
of
like
it,
authenticity on paper, or only the positive side of authenticity. But what I think we all need is for others to accept, like, it's easy to accept, like, someone being happy, being like their goofy self. But what is hard, like, it's like the dark moments, the struggles, right? That's where we need others to, like, see and accept us for who we are, and that there's nothing wrong with us for being like more than just one-dimensional individual.
Yeah. I had just one more thought before I sort of move on from this piece. But I think when we talk about how behavior can be influenced, I think we talked a little bit about how punishments and rewards, but they were action oriented. But there's another form of influencing behavior, which is really just, hey, but I didn't do anything. And that's the problem. Show up for your dog, right? Ignoring a dog, neglecting a dog in a time of need. I think we don't talk about how, I mean, imagine being ignored at a time of need and what that can do to an individual. Right? So there's one thing of, hey, yeah, you can influence behavior by obviously with rewards and punishments, but also understanding that ignoring dogs when there's a need behind it can be so traumatizing and can really change how they start to behave, right? How they are able to express. Like, it's not, I think it's like, it's heartbreaking sometimes when I hear these things that, hey, as soon as you come in, ignore your dog. And the funny aspect of this is, you'd look foolish if you did it to a human being. But the heartbreaking part of this is that dog just wants to say hi to you. Like, what is the issue? How is that hard to comprehend? How is it fair to ignore someone who's saying hi to you? And this poor dog will come back and say hi to you again the next time you do it, which is crazy to me. Because if I walked in somewhere and I said, hey, hi, it's so good to be here, and everyone just ignored me, first of all, I can't even imagine how I'd feel. But then to know that, hey, I live in that house and these are my family members who've been ignoring me, it's like, what? How does that make sense? Right? So I think there's different ways in which we influence our dogs' behavior that don't actually make room for them. And I think it's like, yeah, so I'm going to pause. But anyone else had anything to add? Yeah. Okay.
So
Cool.
I do want to add this. I think my late husband Uttam really modeled this behavior for me. The idea of celebrating authenticity, right? And one of the first times, Chiru, my dog, rescue dog, she never said no to us. And then one day she turned around and she said no. And my husband was so happy about it, right? He, like the way he celebrated that authenticity, that the so-called negative aspect of it. He was like, she feels comfortable enough around me to be herself. And if you think about it, if you think about relationships where you're comfortable enough to be yourself, to be, to bring out those not so good parts, and there is a safe space to hold those not so good parts, I think that is really the goal of relationship building, for me, definitely. And so yeah, that was really touching for me, and I just remembered Chiru, when we were talking about this.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I think I've seen some of those videos also of like them making their food, and they're like, just engaging with him and like sharing preferences and how he's catering to, what each of them needs. And I think that's what it's all about, right? I think sometimes just lose track of what's important. Cool.
And
Okay.
getting yelled at by your dogs, right? Like
Yeah.
my
Hey,
dog's
you got
judging me. My dog's like, Nishi would come and be like, woof, and you could see the irritation on her face with this woof. How do you think you're doing this? And to celebrate all of those aspects, right?
Do you remember Sindur when you came over to our place and like my dog yelled at you? Like not me, she yelled at you, and Sindur's like, okay, you gotta chill, man. Like she figured early on that Sindur could give a solid massage. So she's terrified of people, new people. So she was like, I'm really scared of you. But like you got like some magic there. So I'm gonna like negotiate this with you where I will come close to you, which she takes like couple of like meetings otherwise to sort of have that level of engagement. Like she went to Sindoor and she was like, okay. But then if Sindoor made like one wrong move or like she would start screaming at her, and Sindoor's like, hey, I'm also like talking with these guys and I'm also having like I'm not on work, right? So I think it's interesting, like when you say that your dogs can yell. I think it's amazing because I think when we think of yelling, we think of it as hysterical, but that's not what it is. It's really just an expression of just a heightened expression of something, right? Of an emotion, of a feeling. And it was, I don't know, I thought it was really sweet that she felt like, hey, I know you're a stranger, but I feel comfortable enough to tell you that don't do this and do this, please, right? So I think that's important for all of our dogs, and especially if they're like living with us all the time. But okay, cool. So the last piece of this, and possibly just as a as a sort of setup for tomorrow, is one of the biggest pieces we'll talk about, and that sort of underscores everything that we do at Bharcs or the way that we look at things is really reflexivity. What does that mean? How does our view and our perception of certain things influence or come in the way, or like Surabhi says, color the lens in which we're able to see this dog, or what that ends up looking like, right? And how important it is for us to constantly break down notions, stereotypes, taboos even that exist within ourselves, to be able to come out and see this dog and show up for this dog. And I think it's strange for me because I'm saying that you have to do so much, but all I had to do was actually just work on this myself. Everything else sort of just fell into place, so to speak. And my dogs were like, yeah, this is the version of you that I was waiting for, right? Like I wanted, like every time they give me an indication of, hey, this is working, right? I like that. Like the other day, like we started growing like different varieties of like lemongrass and some other stuff. And then my partner just like, I was on a work call and he kept calling me. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I can't believe it, but Bella just came and called me to open the door because she wanted some grass. And it's like, it's incredible that she's 10 years old. You talk about, oh, you get a puppy at 3 months old and start training them because that's the time that they can learn and you can bond and everything. And we know obviously that's not true. But also to understand that, hey, no matter what their age, it's like if you can give the right environment and if you can be there and show up and not let your own judgments and perceptions and biases sort of impede on their life, I feel like that's a toughest one that I had to do. I think it is a good practice I learned at Bharcs because I sort of have started incorporating that in every other aspect of my life, which is, hey, just take a minute, process what's happened. What is it that we need to do? Why am I struggling so much that my dog is still biting? Why am I struggling so much that my dog barks every time the doorbell rings? Why am I struggling so much that my dog is lunging when we go for a walk, right? It's not that, but it's really what is preventing me from asking the question of, hey, what's going on? Like, hey, we need to talk about this, right? You're not feeling okay, and I can see that. So, but if I keep saying, hey, this dog is just behaving badly, because I just, in my perception, that's just what it is. Either you're behaving well or you're behaving badly, right? That's the notion that I had. And if I continue to sort of let that dictate it, like what a disservice to the richness of this interaction and this relationship, right? So yeah, so Sindhu is leading that tomorrow, which, is going to be killer. So definitely like come and join in there. But I'm going to stop and then pass this around the room if anyone wanted to add anything else before we sort of end the party, so to speak.
Okay. So if nobody has anything to add, then I'll kind of uh, add my bit in here and close, because like you said, we're going to be doing a deep dive on this tomorrow anyways. So I think and something that you said about Bella learning these new things and us changing. I think this idea of co-becoming that I talk about quite frequently. It's a lovely idea by Tim and Gold, and I think we should explore that. And it's the human dog entanglement that we're talking about. We're a unit. We're working as a unit. It isn't us trying to affect something. It's not a machine that we have that we're going to repair and make it behave a certain way. But in the process of helping our dogs, we are also helping ourselves and becoming something interesting and new. And I think that has been reflected very strongly in the journeys that all of you have spoken about. Every one of them has spoken about these extraordinarily transformational journeys, where it doesn't seem to be much all about the dog. It's really as much about the kind of things you've discovered about yourselves and how that has changed. And I think that's the interesting thing that we will explore tomorrow, that the bit on reflexivity. And it's not going to be killer, don't worry. It's going to be very non-violent. We're going to have this conversation. So yeah, I think that brings us to a nice end. Thank you so much, Anushri. It was a really lovely curation of this discussion. And thank you, Surabhi, Saujanya, Eva. This is really nice. It's always so much fun to do it with you, with all of you. So and thank you, Andy, for giving us the opportunity to do this, despite all the technical issues, really letting us run with it. Yes, I think we can conclude, and we will see you tomorrow, same time, for one of the the penultimate session, and then there's the final one. Oh, and Surabhi, should we give them another discount coupon?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we
Yeah?
can, I think we'll share that information with Andy to put up on the group. And then all of the details will be in that post. But yeah, the coupon allows anybody who
Yeah.
is interested in learning more about the Bharcs way to purchase the Canine Essential 101 at a really exciting price. So I think that should help. Yeah.
Yeah, there was so much interest in it last time, so let's
Yeah.
just do it for one
Yeah.
more week. Definitely, anybody who wants to learn, we love you. So if you want to
Yeah.
come through the doors, we want to make that happen. So yeah, we'll let Andy do the post maybe later in the week or something like that. And with that, we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.